Okay, to continue a little bit more regarding Mahayana teachings. So, to validate Mahayana teachings as the teachings of the Buddha. In one way, the study and practice of Buddhism is just it's going down the hill. So it's going down the hill in many, many different ways. I'm not only talking about, how the Buddhist basically lost, if you like, its territory, so to speak, a lot. I mean, your neighboring country, Indonesia, used to be a very, very big Buddhist country. Afghanistan used to be very big Buddhist country. Pakistan, one of the big expounder and the main sort of person who's responsible to maintain the Maitreya tradition. Vasubandhu, the great, scholar and the saint, I guess. Vasubandhu comes from Pakistan. But, from the territory point of view, the Buddhists have lost a lot. But who cares about territory? And maybe not that important. But something more, what do you call it? Alarming is the Buddhist emphasis on wisdom and compassion, and especially the view. That's really going. That's dwindling, and that is dangerous. When people talk about religion, people always tend to think in terms of morality and ethic a lot, and some sort of a belief, morality and ethic based on that belief. So even in a traditionally very Buddhist sort of society, I guess Chinese, Tibetan, when we talk about being Buddhist, we can't help but to think in terms of, what we mean by being Buddhist. We are always talking about method, isn't it? How often do you meditate? Are you vegetarian? Are you non-violent? And then do you go to temples? And then probably if you are slightly better at sort of evaluating what is being Buddhist, then have you taken precepts? Do you follow certain code of conduct? Never we really think in terms of how should I put it? The view, the wisdom. it's sort of understandable because wisdom is so not, it's sort of immeasurable. It's easier to ask, do you meditate every day? Ideally, Buddhists, among Buddhists, we should be asking questions like, have you thought today during the breakfast, have you thought that whatever appeared, whatever is appearing in our projection, whatever we are projecting is just a projection, it's not real. We don't talk like that. Whose student are you? Do you have to meditate? Always something to do with how much we do and what kind of diet you have. You don't think in terms of the wisdom. So, even the questions like Mahayana needing to answer these questions, whether it's even a teaching of the Buddha is, it's not a big concern for many of Buddhist followers, I guess. But actually it is important. I will tell you reason. If you are following the general teaching of the Buddha, more likely that if you kill somebody, or if you are stealing something, or if you are lying, yes, it's very easy you are doing something wrong. Bad karma, isn't it? That's what you will hear. But then, in the Mahayana, in the Bodhisattvas and the Sutras, says there are only three things the Bodhisattva should really refrain from doing, which is covetous mind, harmful mind, and the wrong view. Other than that, if it is benefiting sentient beings, not only is it not a bad karma, you actually accumulate more good karma. You understand what I'm saying? So you go and tell that to the general audience. They will not buy this. Really? I can actually accumulate merit through stealing? Are you saying that I can actually, accumulate merit through lying? Yes. To the certain extent, that's what we are saying here. Anything that takes you further from the view, the absolute view, is a non-virtuous. So this is why, the stories like the Bodhisattva's inexpressible action. Okay, very simple example. I think this is, a renunciation is considered a good thing, isn't it? Renunciation is supposedly a good thing. Almost all religions talk about some form of a renunciation. The Buddhists also like to talk. And when we talk about a renunciation, our idol is always some monks or nuns. So for the Buddhists, we have people like Shariputra, Moggallana, Ananda, begging bowl, three pieces of, outfit, bare feet, begging arms, Burma, Sri Lanka, they still do that, begging food. And you also don't beg more than what you need. All that it fits with ordinary people's mind. But then you explore Mahayana. Kuan Yin has earrings. Manjushri has sword. What's he doing with a sword? Isn't it violent? He has, Manjushri is adorned with garments, jewels, and his hair is washed with all kinds of, shampoo and, like perfumes and just amazing, richness. And you know this. I mean, if you look at the old Chinese paintings, the bodhisattvas, they're very rich. They're very colorful. And they do also all kinds of, and then many of them have, wives, not only wife. They have, good food. They have rides. You and I don't have elephant. Samandabhadra, Mount Omisha, Mount Omisha, Samandabhadra has a big elephant. That's an equivalent to like solid gold Rolls Royce, That's a very rich. Manjushri has lion. And Manjushri has his sweetheart, Saraswati. All of that. You understand what I mean? So then it's understandable. There's this question like, hey, wait a minute. This doesn't sound like a Buddhism. Earrings, nose rings, elephant as your ride. What is this? This doesn't sound like Buddhism at all. This is not Buddhism. You understand what I'm saying? But the fact of the matter is, here the Mahayana is telling us a very, very important truth. The truth is that it is not the pleasure objects that binds you. It is the attachment to the pleasure objects that is binding you. This message needs to be understood in the modern time. I think it's so important. It's one way to actually propagate the Buddha Dharma and maintain the Buddha Dharma. I was just recently talking, teaching something in Hong Kong that there are many people, like for instance in this room also. I'm sure many of you don't want to meditate. Okay, maybe for about a week. After this weekend, probably you might want to catch up with your meditation. But I think almost I can guarantee after 1 week you will forget. You will never do it. And I'm sure some of you might have Buddha statues which you don't even see it for months after months, even though it's sitting there in your living room. Isn't it? And I'm sure many of you have a strange habits. Playing mahjong, I don't know, betting. And I'm sure you lie, you cheat, you do. I'm sure I don't want to go through all the details. I'm sure you have all kinds of kinky stuff going on in your head. But if you have some sort of a admiration to the Buddha, Dharma and the Sangha, and especially if you have the admiration to the view such as the shunyata or a dependent arising, that's good, that's really good. That's what the Mahayana can say. Because if you need to be judged, if needing if your practitioner is judged by only moral and ethic and superficial outer appearance and deeds, very difficult. Then the teaching of the absolute teaching of the Buddha cannot be materialized. It cannot be. Then it's very difficult. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that nobody needs. I'm not saying that we don't need renunciation, so on and so forth. Yes, renunciation is necessary, but renunciation can be practiced in a much more grander, healthier, easier, much more practical and beneficial way. After all, this is supposedly, we call it Sugata. Sugata. In Tibetan, we call it Deshik, which actually means a blissful path. No self-flagellation, basically. Beating ourselves is not not the essence. Is not. It's actually even discouraged. So these sort of points of trying to answer the question whether the Mahayana is the teaching of the Buddha or not, and the process of answering, there are a lot of wisdom in it, something that we can't how should I say, overlook. And if I go through the stanzas a little bit, to state that everything is emptiness, to say that samsara and nirvana does not exist truly, to state that cause, condition and effects are illusion. All these statements are ultimate. Relatively, Mahayana never rejects this. Relatively, everything exists. Everything exists relatively as how it appears individually. And the order, function, usage, all are not chaotic. So this is why the statement of the Shunyata is not contradictory to the statement of selflessness in the general teaching Basically, what we are saying is this, the idea of the selflessness is expanded and is much greater. Another reason. In the Sharvakayana, so much emphasis is spent on accomplishing the self-liberation, individual liberation. But even in the Sharvakayana, it is believed that the Buddha has accomplished the individual liberation, and also Buddha liberates. Buddha's activity, Buddha's quality and activity liberates all sentient beings. So, Mahayana teachings are therefore the vehicle and the method of liberating sentient beings. So, by consequences, the Mahayana has to be part of has to be very much the teachings of the Buddha. This is, again, if you are not familiar with some of these kind of expressions, it may be a little bit tricky, but basically what we are saying is individual liberation, just liberating oneself, is one thing. But when we are talking about a complete enlightenment, meaning achieving the Buddhahood, the state of the Buddha, without the bodhicitta, which is wishing to enlighten all sentient beings, that is just simply not possible. Okay, what we are talking here is when a Buddha, when a being, a bodhisattva, practices the bodhisattva path, as the bodhisattva, you have to relinquish the idea of self and the other. If not, if there is even still a notion of me as an enlightened individual being, and the others as the sentient beings that are not enlightened yet, there is no, then this person is still not, this person has still not overcome the dualistic of samsara and nirvana. So basically, to be Buddha, you need to go beyond the distinctions of an enlightened being and a samsaric being. So even with that, Mahayana has to be a valid path, and the Mahayana has to be taught by the Buddha. Okay, the next we are talking about a type of tolerance. So we are now, the Maitreya is explaining here why when Buddha taught to the general audience, not all audience, not all the listeners can accept the Mahayana path. The first is, we were talking about type, the Bodhisattva type yesterday. So he's expanding this a little bit more. There's a sutra where supposedly Manjushri was discussing shunyata and emptiness. And supposedly 500 arhats, they couldn't tolerate this. It was too much. And supposedly they actually had a heart attack and died. Have you ever heard of this? Probably not. But there is that. This is a very interesting, even for what's happening right now. It certainly proves that I'm not doing a good job. Because it certainly proves that I'm not doing a good job, or you're actually all enlightened. Because, as I'm explaining, nobody's even closer to the death. Nobody's even getting shocked about the shunyata. Being able to conceive the shunyata, I think, is actually, I'm going to dwell on this a little bit. This is going to be it will take time, I think. This, just needs lots of hearing, lot of contemplation, lot of study and analysis, and also, of course, practice. And it's not a new phenomenon. It has been like that everywhere for a very long time. Let's say when Mahayana Buddhism traveled to China, I'm very interested. I don't know much about Chinese history and the history of language, history of nuances. But I'm guessing the Confucius value of, filial piety, good and bad, doing the right thing, respecting to the elders, the leaders, all of this will have an influence on, on understanding of the shunyata. I'm not saying that there's no understanding. It's not. It's just cultural. I think the culture makes a big. Culture really is an important setting. I think I've said this last time also here. somehow, I mean, of course, it's probably unfair to say this, but somehow the concept of non-duality is Indian product. It's an Indian product. Indian psyche has that cultural thing that they can sort of, but they're losing it. I feel they're losing it. A lot of good, bad, otherwise in India, still the Indian culture, if you look into it, whatever is considered bad suddenly is good. Whatever is considered good suddenly is bad. One time I was traveling to South India. It's like the whole plane was full with hermaphrodite. They're not eunuch, they're hermaphrodite. Like transgender. They're distinctive. They're all dressed white and all that. Completely, my plane was full of them. I was so amazed because sometimes in the street, the Indians go crazy if you meet some of these transgender, and then they're bad omen. They're like considered really like the lowest of the lowest. But when I was asking these people where they have been going and what they are doing, they were just invited by very, very rich families, and the rich family's son was getting married. They were invited by wedding to bless the bride and the bridegroom. Well, here you go. Suddenly they are very auspicious substance. It's big. You understand what I'm saying? And then the classic thing. It's amazing to notice. Things like Ganesha. Singapore has so many. Ganesha, the elephant, wealth deity, wealth god, riding mouse. His ride is mouse, rat. That's so interesting, isn't it? It makes sense if it is, mathematically speaking, mouse riding an elephant fits in our head. But elephant riding mouse will be dead. But for the Indian mind, it fits. You know what I mean? The context, the cultural sort of thing, I have a feeling it really makes a big difference. But as I said, India definitely, I've always been sort of slightly teasing, but mainly being mean with a lot of my Indian friends. They've forgotten Buddha. They've lost it. They're losing it. But India has that non-dual, sort of the non-duality atmosphere still. Here and there you'll find. I'm talking about this point. It's kind of important. Now Buddhism is growing. Buddhism is sort of becoming interested in the places like West. And I don't know. I don't know. This is something that Buddhist scholars should pay some attention. It would be interesting. How, in the West, I think studies such as shunyata, emptiness, is very, I think, many intellectual people, they love it, they like it. Emptiness. Concepts such as relative, especially like physics, people, physicists. they can talk about these things to a certain extent. Basically, I find it easier sort of talk about shunyata, how everything is your projection and the projection is not real and so on and so forth. But, again, the real non-duality, if you really go at the bottom, in the sort of the heart of the non-duality, I don't know how much West is still being able to conceive that. I will give you an example. For instance, in the West, many, even the Buddhists, they have a hard time understanding things like reincarnation. Past life, next life. And even the so-called Buddhist, in the new Buddhist, American Buddhists, European Buddhists, they, somehow many of them even think this is sort of thing that got influenced by Hindus, or especially the Tibetans. The Tibetans, they talk about reincarnation. So of course the Tibetan whole reincarnation system, that also that spoils things. But reincarnation is not that easy to be accepted. And this, to me, proves that understanding of the shunyata in the West is still not matured. Because, as Nagarjuna said, for those who can accept the shunyata in a complete, sort of, not just incomplete, completely, for them, everything is acceptable, everything is workable. Because no sound, sane Mahayana Buddhists are saying reincarnation exists truly, ultimately. Remember, even the samsara does not exist, even the nirvana does not exist. So why should we cling on to reincarnation? That's a small matter. But joining the relative truth and ultimate truth is difficult. And finding, yes, so being able to tolerate the concept of the shunyata, I think is quite difficult. So here, Maitreya is giving some outlining few reasons why some of us, we just can't accept Mahayana as the teachings of the Buddha.
I'm not sure I understand.
This is how I feel when one time it was in California. I was driven by, I was in somebody's car. He was driving me a very long distance. I don't know this person so well, but anyway, he played my teaching in the car. And I couldn't understand one word of what I was teaching. And this is a good proof of karma, by the way. See, like, you guys have a certain karmic debt with me. So this weekend, instead of doing a lot of good things like in shopping malls, wherever, swimming pool, whatever, you are here trying to understand these unfathomable things. And this also is because of the shunyata. Everything works because of the shunyata. Anyway, being not tolerant to the concept of the shunyata is one of the reasons why Mahayana cannot be accepted. Okay, I will let you ask some questions since I think we will spend a little bit more time on question and answer. Try to stick with the subject if you can.
Rinpoche, may I just ask for one of the participants? Rinpoche, you mentioned that truth is the fundamental purpose of Buddhism, and if you speak of relative truth and absolute truth, and how does speaking of absolute truth present the truth itself and fall short of it? My question is, how do you realize this truth? How do you experience this truth that is beyond concept, space, and time? How do you go beyond the intellect and make this living experience?
Yes, I think we talked about that this morning already. We are talking about the method. When let's hope Maitreya will give us some ideas. We are just beginning, aren't we? So I'm sure there are methods, but briefly, I think I have explained this morning through methods such as shamatha and vipassana.
Another one came through. Hi Rinpoche, how can these non-Cinderella teachings on Shunyata be put into practice when we go through the excruciating physical pain in our lives, perhaps due to medical conditions?
Okay. Yes. It doesn't even have to be, excruciating pain. It can be just a simple pimple somewhere, I don't know, in the bottom of your bottom or something like that. Something very itchy. When you have that, chanting no nose, no ears, no bottom, no pimple, I don't think it's going to work. Why? Because we are so conditioned. We are so conditioned. And, even, for instance, a kid in somewhere, a slum in Brazil or Mumbai, I think their pimple bothers them less than a kid in Dubai or California who has probably even smaller pimple than these kids in Dubai, in Bombay. But the itchiness, and it will bother them more. You understand what I'm saying? Because we have been conditioned. We are victim of cause and condition. So therefore, we will just have to go step by step, dealing with this cause and condition. And, it may sound like an impossible battle, but actually it's not. It's not. It's a matter of how savvy you are using the method to fight with this habit. For instance, our mind can be trained. A small pimple that bothers you can be easily forgotten if there is something else, a good news, for instance, or a even worse news. And this proves that mind can be trained. So, but I don't want people to assume that just because you have heard Shunyata teachings for a day or two, one can immediately apply that. I think this kind of quick fix and instant pain killing might not really work for everyone. I mean, it depends on you. I mean, are you really good at applying this remedy wholeheartedly and fully? It might work. We call them disciple of superior faculties. But such kind of practitioner or the disciple is very rare. Most of us, we will have to go step by step. So I think through the mind training, we can slowly enhance our appreciation of Shunyata so that gradually most excruciating outer and inner and secret pain, no matter what happens, we can actually not just tolerate, we actually see them as an illusion, so that you don't even have to have the burden of tolerating it. That should happen. And I believe that that definitely can happen through the mind training. Okay? Any more? Yes?
Hi, Guruji. If Buddha doesn't have duality of Buddhism, then how does he save sentient beings or help sentient beings?
Yeah. That's a classic question. Actually, I will take this opportunity to again talk about Mahayana. Again, remember we have this challenge of why Mahayana is, why Mahayana is even a teaching of the Buddha or not. I will take this opportunity to explain, because this is kind of important. This is talking about a Buddha now. We are talking about a Buddha. Again, the understanding of the Buddha by the general and the Mahayana, different, big difference. Generally, when we talk about a Buddha, you are always pointing at this Indian, I should be more precise, Nepali. If he happened to be alive today, he will be holding Nepalese citizen. Born in Nepal, Lumbini, as the prince. Gender, M, male. Caste, Kshatriya, which is warrior. Mother, Maya Devi. Father, Shuddhodana. So on and so forth. Year, 2,500 years or so, So all that, basically a person who got disgusted with the fact that everything is impermanent, everything is an illusion. So what's the point of, really deceiving ourselves? If I can't save my own from this reality of death and birth and old age and sickness, how am I going to help my own child and my wife, and for that matter, all my father and mother? So this prince who basically sneaked out of the palace and in search for the truth, finding some teachers, meditate under their guidance for many, many years, and then finally under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, achieved the realization, and then upon the request of Indra and Brahma, begin to teach, beginning from Saranath, Virtue Speak, so on and so forth. And finally, at around 80, his age, he passed into the parinirvana in a place called Vaishali. Okay, so this is what the general audience will understand. Now, if you are talking to a Mahayana, and I'm coming back to your question, Mahayana will say, all this is a show. Lalita Vistara Sutra, which is actually the sort of the autobiography of Buddha himself. Lalita Vistara Sutra. Actually the title, this is his own life story. And the title itself says it all. It means, I think at the moment it's translated as play in full. It's a complete game. It is all a show in order to benefit sentient beings. So coming back to your question, Buddha, an enlightened being, does not have the distinctions of samsaric being, those who are suffering, those who are ignorant, and sublime beings, those who are free from suffering and ignorance, for the Buddha himself. But devotees like us, our projection of the Buddha's projection, basically, we are talking about our projection of his projection. So our projection of his projection is he being a compassionate, omniscient, and omnipotent. He sees the, sentient beings. He sees the suffering. He then teaches us the cause of the suffering, so on and so forth. This is the fundamental Mahayana approach. All about how it is your own individual, perception. And actually this is quite an important. Even the concept of Buddha, in general, the Buddha is always referred to the historical figure. In the Mahayana, that historical figure is of course a manifestation, Nirmanakaya, it's a display, but the real Buddha lies within your own nature of the mind. So it is much more, it's different. So when we talk about the absolute nature of the mind, then we don't talk about time, we don't talk about space, then we talk about non-duality. It is a very important thing to how should I say? These are the points that makes Buddhism quite complex and very deep, but it's quite very crucial. Because if you don't talk, if it is not like this, then so-called the Buddha for the Buddhism is that, and the religious theistic people's creator, almighty God will have no difference. A truly existing, externally existing savior is something that the Buddhists will not accept. Okay, so basically, there's the Buddha, his own point of view, and then there's our point of his point of view. For the Buddha, his own point of view, we don't know. As Chandrakirti said, that is unfathomable. Deluded beings like us, using this deluded limited language, we cannot even begin to understand the ways and the functions and the doings of the enlightened beings such as the Buddha. The only word we can, the only adequate sort of word is spontaneously displaying the compassion that is pouring out from the understanding of the non-duality. That's about all we can say. But we can talk about our projection of the Buddha's projection, to whom we can communicate through meditation, remembrance of the Buddha, prayer, beseeching for the blessing. All this is happening for your projection. So this is what Buddha himself said. The moment you think Buddha is sitting here and he is blessing me, he is here. Moment you think Buddha is here blessing me, he is here. That is your projection of your projection. And that Buddha, we smear it with our projection of, he knows my problem, as if there is a problem. That's how it functions. It's quite well explained in the Uttara Tantra by Maitreya, if you want to explore this a little bit. There's a very beautiful example. I don't know whether this works for you. There's a very beautiful example of a beggar sees, I don't know, I'm not remembering this completely and correctly. A beggar sees a reflection of the god, king of the god Indra, sitting on the throne. King of the Indra is sitting up there on the throne. The beggar dare not look up. Okay, so the reflection of the Indra is on the floor, and the beggar gets so attracted to this majestic, beautiful being, and then ask around, wow, who is this? And then someone said, this is Lord Indra. I want to be like him. How do I do that? The people surrounding, well, it's not achievable. It is definitely, you can do it. You can actually achieve that state if you want. Then the beggar gets more excited. Like, how? Well, tame your mind. Do good things. Avoid doing bad things. Be disciplined. Be generous. So on and so forth. And then beggar, because he really wants to be like him, becomes so diligent and do all this according to the path, and then he ends up achieving that state. Maitreya, it's actually teaching of the Maitreya. He said, first of all, that image of the Indra is not even real. It's just a reflection. And being a reflection, it doesn't even have the thought, hey, the beggar is looking at me, I'd better behave so that he gets inspired. Doesn't think like that. But due to the beggars, the most important thing is the beggar getting excited and wanting to be like him. That's the most important one. If he doesn't have that, then there's no point. That excitement of wanting to be like this magnificent boy, magnificent man, is what we call Buddha nature. And so this wish, getting acquainted with that reflection, somehow applying all these tricks, such as sitting, such as generosity. These are you actually managing to achieve that state. That's how prayers and the blessing works. This is really important. Again, the Mahayana, again here, Buddhists don't believe in praying to, especially in the Mahayana, praying to an external deity. And then finally he answering. Because if that is the case, our Buddha has to be really deaf. Because we do lots of prayers. Most of them are not really answered, is it? So that's how it works. Any more questions?
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, Rinpoche.
Okay.
Okay, if one tool to motivate oneself to practice is ignorance, one of which is the thinking that there is an enlightenment. So what is enlightenment? And then what then are we practicing for?
Very good. Okay. The most easiest way to understand for now is enlightenment is where there is no obsession and anxiety. Where there is no uncertainty. Maybe uncertainty is better. Uncertainty is the biggest cause of suffering, It is. We are never sure what's next. Most of it is a wild guess. We just have to believe that that's going to happen. It's a wild guess. But beneath there is uncertainty, and this uncertainty is very much linked with ignorance, which is obsession. So when the freedom from that is very possible. Again, here we have to really begin to understand that enlightenment is really not true, sort of physically existing state or some sort of a country or a transformation. It's basically a shift. This shift is possible, Shifting. It's like a shifting of shifting the dimension. At the moment, you are human being, and you are looking at the world through a certain dimension. The dimension that you have been influenced through your education, your parents, your society, storybooks that you have read, the teachings that you have received. With all this, you are looking at the world and you are interreacting with the world. And that's the kind of a dimension you have. And that enlightenment is basically a shift from that dimension. It's possible. And when that happens, it can be a really big shift. All you need is a glimpse of an indication. And that you learn through hearing and contemplation. Let's say after 40 years of being married with somebody, husband or wife, suddenly you realize he or she has a tail. That's it. You will have a different shift. You will have your idea of your husband and wife is shifted. Oh my God. Who is he or she? Tail, just a small tail, can shift your idea of him or her. Like that. Right now we are looking at this dimension. And we are sort of believing that this is making sense. But something could happen that it will shift. Then we say, wow, why did I bought that? Why did I stay here? Why was I wearing my shirts from the top? Why was I ironing my underpants? You understand all the obsessions and small things that we do? You could shift. That shift, especially permanent shift, enlightenment, is very possible. We take a break now.